Let's move on to a question on evolution for Cardinal Peltz from Joe Blades.
As a young Catholic scientist, I'd like to ask the Cardinal to clarify the Roman Catholic Church's position on evolution and comment on whether the dichotomy between science and religion is in fact real.
Well, science and religion are two different activities, and in the Catholic Church, you can believe to some extent what you like about evolution. I think Darwin made a great contribution. I remember talking with Julius Kornberg, a very distinguished biologist, and he's worked with ants for years. And he said, you know, he's managed to change them by changing the conditions. But there are a number of things that evolution doesn't explain. Darwin realised that. Darwin was a theist because he said he couldn't believe that the immense cosmos and all the beautiful things in the world came about either by chance or out of necessity. He said, I have to be ranked as a theist. Now,
that's just not true.
Excuse me,
it's plain not true.
It's on page 92 of his autobiography. Go and have a look.
Mr. Pell came with all the receipts. My guy came prepared for sure. I ended up having to go and take a peek at the autobio, and on page 92 was talking about being a theist. But if you read further up to page 94, you actually see him making a conclusion that he has to remain agnostic. So I found that interesting, how the Cardinal could miss such context. Maybe he has a lazy research team, I don't know. Maybe when they found that passage where Charles was saying, I'm supposed to be called a theist, they were like, aha! Charles is one of us. I don't know. But I even wanted to read more and more of it. But I got lazy, so I ended up consulting my personal AI assistant. So I'm just gonna read it verbatim. It goes like this. Darwin describes his relationship with religion and belief in a nuanced way. Darwin mentions that while he retains a sense of wonder about the universe, he moves away from traditional religious beliefs. He often emphasizes the conflict between his scientific observations and the literal interpretations of religious texts. By the end of his life, Darwin identifies more as an agnostic, expressing uncertainty about the existence of God, rather than outright disbelief. Overall, his self-description reveals a complex interplay between faith, doubt, and the pursuit of scientific understanding.
You accept that humans evolved from non-humans. So let me put this to you as a question. At what point in this evolutionary scale was a soul imparted to the humans from God?
Very good question.
Look, a soul isn't, it's not like putting a spot of gin in a tonic. The soul is the principle of life. So whenever there was a principle of life that could question, that could be open to awe, that was able to communicate, then we had the first human.
Science and religion address different questions of life.
Now, we believe that the first humans developed in South Africa. I'm not quite sure how long ago, and that all humans have developed from that. We know most about that. There aren't remains. We know most about that because of the drawings they left on walls and caves and that sort of thing. No such thing from Neanderthals. So we can't say exactly when there was a first human, but we have to say if there are humans, there must have been a first one. There might have been equal first, but if there is a progression, there's got to be first.
So generally, the main contention between believers and scientists when it comes to the origin of the universe is that one group believes in a self-causing system, while the other group believe in there being a singular intent for the creation of everything.
So are you talking about a kind of Garden of Eden scenario with an actual Adam and Eve?
Well, what Adam and Eve terms, what do they mean? Life and earth. It's like every man. That's a beautiful, sophisticated, a mythological account. It's not science, but it's there to tell us two or three things. First of all, that God created the world and the universe. Secondly, that the key to the whole of the universe, the really significant thing, are humans. And thirdly, it's a very sophisticated mythology to try to explain the evil and the suffering
But
of the
it isn't
world.
a literal truth. You shouldn't see it in any way as being a historical or literal truth.
It's certainly not a scientific truth, and it's a religious story told for religious purposes.
And just quickly, because the Old Testament in particular is full of these kind of stories, I mean, is there a point where you distinguish between metaphor and reality? For example, Moses receiving the Ten Commandments inscribed directly by God on a mountain.
I'm not sure that the Old Testament says that God inscribed the Ten Commandments, but leaving that aside, it's difficult to know how exactly that worked, but Moses was a great man. There was a great encounter with the divine. Actually, with Moses, we get the key that enables us to come together with the Greeks with reason, because Moses said, "Who will I tell the Egyptians?" And he said, "Tell that my name is I am who I am."
This guy, you know, the funny thing is that when I first watched this debate, I actually thought the Cardinal won the debate. When I watched it the second time, I thought Richard Dawkins won the debate. The reasons being, the first time I watched I was still a militant believer, and when I watched it years later, the second time, I was a militant atheist. So yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, I'm going to bring Richard Dawkins back in here, because we've moved from evolution, obviously, to the biblical versions of it. Your response?
Well, I'm curious to know if Adam and Eve never existed, where did original sin come from? But I also would like to clarify the point about whether there ever was a first human. That's a rather difficult and puzzling question, because we know that the previous species from which we're descended is probably Homo erectus, and before that some sort of Australopithecine. But there never was a last Homo erectus who gave birth to the first Homo sapiens. Every creature ever born belonged to the same species as its parents. The process of evolution is so gradual that you can never say, aha, now suddenly we have the first human.
Then why do we have this image in our minds then? It shows a clear progression of one to another. Unless he's saying that there are overlaps, then that'll make sense.
It was always a case of just a slightly different from the previous generation. That's a scientific point, which I think is quite interesting. I'm not sure if it has theological significance, except that I think successive popes have tried to suggest that the soul did indeed get added, rather like gin to tonic, at some particular point during evolution. At some point in evolution, there was no soul, and then later there was one.
It's the aliens, my brother.
So it is quite an interesting question to ask. Now we have rather a good fossil record from Africa of the descent of humans, from Australopithecines to various species of Homo, perhaps Homo habilis, perhaps Homo erectus, then archaic Homo sapiens, and then modern Homo sapiens. At what point did the soul get injected? And what does the idea of original sin mean if Adam and Eve never existed?
I'll just quickly let you respond to that.
Well, I mean, God wasn't running around giving injections.
There's a woman named Mary, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
And if there is no first person,
where did the soul come from then?
I don't like that question, Tony. I don't understand what a soul is.
The soul is a principle of life.
But
There are animal souls.
Do
All living things have some principle of life. An animal has a principle of life. A human has a soul, a principle of life, which is immensely more sophisticated. We even have a voice box, which is one of the great miracles, so that we can communicate our thoughts to one another rather than just grunting.
Vocal cord, the voice box. Animals make sound. Okay.
I'm pleased we're not grunting tonight. Let's move along. You can...
Did someone just grunt? It's either the people who are asking the questions or Richard Dawkins.
Well, don't forget you can still vote at Qandavote.tv, I should say, on the question, does religious belief make the world a better place? Over 15,000 viewers have already voted, and we'll check before the end of the program for the final results.
So yes, that was a wrap for part 4. I'll be putting a break on this series. The next topics, I sampled them. They weren't really interesting. So I decided to look into something that I think might be even more interesting. I'm actually afraid to say even more interesting because how much more can I go? More interesting. I just got reminded of Kobe Bryant. Okay, so please show your likes by liking the video. Does that make sense? I think it does. Also, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see more updates, you can also hit the notification bell so that I can be popping up notifications on your screen every now and again when I find something interesting to share with you guys. Anyways, I'm out and enjoy the rest of your day or evening.